Hi everyone, welcome to FO Podcasts. I'm Ranjani Iyer Mohanty. I'm speaking to Barun Mohanty. His major claim to fame is that he's my husband, but he's also a global social impact leader and former McKinsey principal whose career spans strategy consulting, entrepreneurship, and large-scale philanthropic investment across 4 continents. After his 15 years at McKinsey & Company, he built and led the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation's international operations, engaging in systemic education reform, financial inclusions, and jobs livelihood programs in India, South Africa, and the US. Hi, Barun, and thank you for joining me on FO Podcast. So the last month or so, we've been hearing more and more about the rise of the Cockroach Janta Party, or CJP. We've heard about the Chief Justice Suryakant, whose comment about the unemployed youth of India being like cockroaches seemed to spark a movement. We've heard about the founder of the movement, Abhijit Dipke, a student who's just finished his master's degree at Boston University and returned to New Delhi. We've heard about Sonam Wangchuk, the famous activist and educationalist, who was actually the inspiration for the character Wangdu played by Amir Khan in the movie The Three Idiots. Wangchuk has lent his support to the cause and fasted for 26 days. We've heard about the education minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, who the students are demanding accept responsibility for the leaks of national exam papers, which are critical to attaining higher education and later jobs. The students are demanding that he resign. But India, and perhaps more specifically mainstream press, often seems to get caught up in individual personalities and politics at the expense of seriously analyzing the underlying causes. There has even been some online chatter that foreign forces are instigating or supporting the CJP. However, there seems to be ample evidence and evidence. There seems to be ample reason and evidence that this movement is propelled by long-standing, deep-seated grievances. Barun, you were born and educated in New Delhi, and you've spent most of your working life here, first in the corporate world and then in the field of education, promoting education for the underprivileged. How does your experience, both professional and personal, explain the rise of the Cockroach Party?
Thanks, Ranjani. I think you raised some very interesting points about an issue that may well be a defining moment for India over the next little while. I think it's defining because what has started with the Cockroach Party is both an effect of the dismissive use of the word cockroach by the Chief Justice of India, which, even though he may or may not have meant something specific and poor about these people, just shows a little bit of the disdain with which the class system in India actually look at people who are lower class or seen as lower class. But I want to put that aside because I personally have always come from the perspective that we need to think about how India can become strong and how India can become bigger. And if this spark can focus enough attention on the crucial issues that India has not really confronted in a way that changes the dynamic of the country. What do I mean by that? This whole episode, of course, as everybody knows, started because of a paper leak from some of the NEET exams, which have been set up in order to find a way to distill down number of applicants to a college or university system that students aspire to go to. But think about that. The odds of getting into these medical degrees, the MBBA degrees, the odds are about 3 to 100 for applying students. And that links very strongly with the amount of educational, both infrastructure and institutions that India has been able to generate. 3 out of 100 applicants would get into these medical degrees. And that actually in India applies across the way for all kinds of things, engineering, legal, etc. The odds are low.
And yet, if I can just interrupt you here, there is so much effort expended on these exams, on preparing for these exams, both by students and families. I think it is a large expenditure, effort-wise, time-wise, expense-wise. Am I right?
Absolutely. These have become high-stake things that can determine people's future, between living in relative poverty all the way through to making it big. And that can range from relatively lower level government jobs all the way through to the higher echelons of private sector. So the education system has not kept up with demand. And over time, a lot of the people who can either afford it or who are academically smart have been going overseas to study in other countries. And most of them have been in the Western Hemisphere, English-speaking countries. The US has been the major recipient, but Canada, Australia, England have been major destination points for India. So that's been one set of things. The other is that the job market in India has been poor. And if you look at any of the basic measures of unemployment, India has done increasingly poorly over time. The youth employment numbers are high, 9.9% nationally. It's about 14% in urban India, and 25% of 15 to 29-year-olds are what they call NEET, N-E-E-T, which is not employed, educated, or trained. So these are some of the forces that have been at work in India. Traditionally, over the last 20, 30 years, a lot of people have been going overseas to study. That tap is now being turned off by political forces and other forces in other countries. So the number of Indian students going to the US, I think, has dropped by well over, I had written out the numbers somewhere, 10 to 20%. Similar in Canada, and so on. So that tap has been turned off. I think people have read enough about how much it is, how much the environment has changed in the US in particular for Indian students to stay on and work. The H-1B situation, work visa situation has become one where you have to put up $100,000 US before you apply, etc. So the number of jobs that Indian students can take elsewhere has declined. All of which begs the question, why hasn't India set itself up to be successful both for training its youth well as placing them in jobs that make sense? And I think that is where this movement should point people who want to change the system towards.
And so you think, the CJP is currently, asking for like the resignation of the education minister and accountability for exam corruption. Do you think they're asking for or focusing on the right things, or as you seem to explain, their grievances are actually part of something much bigger?
Yeah, their grievances are definitely part of something much bigger. And I can understand that as younger people who have met horrendous challenges in actually taking these exams and, believing that taking those exams, getting through them, will show them the right path in terms of their futures. For such a system to break down in terms of the leaks of papers has truly jolted them. But it has also tapped into a nerve among all Indian students who understand that getting jobs today commensurate with their skill sets is very, very hard. And I think all of what I spoke about is at the back of many people's minds. And it's come together in a sort of a flash based on this leak of the exam paper.
And so
in the short,
sorry, go ahead.
In the short term, I think some of the attention will be on the specifics of their demands. Resignation of the minister, overall of the exam system, and things like that. Compensation for students who've suffered, and that is totally fine for the government and the students to sort something amicable out. But if we were to stop there, we would have lost, we meaning Indians, would have lost a massive opportunity to take a real close look at ourselves.
And so although this spark, which has sort of exploded into a movement, has happened now, and maybe things like AI knocking off all the programmer jobs, all of that has played into it. The reduction in immigration opportunities have all added into it. This problem has been probably a long time in the making, I would assume, right? Starting from the 60s, when sort of, some educated people started to move out of the country, and there was a certain amount of brain drain then, even, right? And that, and maybe now it has reached an explosive situation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think what you're saying reminds me that some of the challenges of where India is today have gone back to its post-independence time frame, where the class system has sort of set the standards for different expectations for people at different strata of society. So rarely or never has India explicitly said that basic infrastructure, both physical infrastructure as well as education, should be equally accessible to all Indians. And if you go and travel in India, that takes about 10 minutes for every human being to figure out that the mega rich, the politicians, live in a different India, in a very different India, which can compare with any developed country overseas. Whereas the vast majority of India lives in a very different place, where basics like electricity, water, sanitation are not guaranteed, and
also education in that, I guess.
And definitely education, because the Indian education system has also lived in a very old tradition where the teacher is never challenged in class. And some of this then goes back to what happens in a conservative society where adults are rarely or never challenged by younger people. So a real intellectual debate on substance often doesn't happen in school and is never encouraged. I grew up in Delhi, going to a fairly good quality school, and even though we were seen as an outstanding educational institution, I cannot remember a single occasion when we had a class discussion about one particular topic where people could provide different perspectives, challenge what was being said, even say stupid things. But as a child, You need to be trained to do that. I learned much of that in the West when I worked and lived here. But in a sense, the creativity, the innovation, and all of that is knocked out of you with a by rote and always accept somebody else. So that is at the heart of India's education system.
How was your experience at IIT in that respect?
So the
Was that
IITs,
an improvement on the school?
so the IITs are university now. It's one of those things. It's become a brand in the world, and Indians have sold it well. I think there's been a lot of outstanding talent going through the IIT. But if you take any society and you take 1% of it, that'll be a really smart set of people. And if you put them through a 5-year course at any university, you will probably end up getting some really smart people that come out at the other end. But we're talking 0.5 to 1% of the entire population of a country that go to the IITs.
I meant more, was the atmosphere at IIT more one that encouraged inquiry and questioning? And,
No, of course not, because it's just an extension of the education system. And so the IITs my experience was an extraordinarily uninspiring place for the most part. And I was pretty smart, and I did relatively well at IIT Delhi. Studied mechanical engineering, and got and graduated with a distinction and a first class and all of that. But never were we inspired by most of our professors. There were one or two who actually thought about what the students were thinking about, but it wasn't a place which inspired a lot of students. Most of these students were pretty self-driven anyway, and I don't think the IITs contributed a huge heck of a lot. We can have a separate discussion on the IITs and the education system in some form, but India's education system, broadly speaking, has been stop and start. There has been no accountability on what students are learning. And only with the efforts of NGOs like Pratham, who started the whole ASAR management thing, do we today know that most of the children going through government schools cannot read or write appropriate to their grade specific requirements. And that's a whole mess out there that the government is slowly getting to grips with. And consecutive governments have been going there. But what is probably required is to break it and build something completely different, and to run some experiments on how, in the world of AI and the digital world to come, how are we preparing Indian youth from day zero to be a strong part of that? Until we have that, India will never become strong, and everything will be a short term. Today there'll be a leak from one exam which will set something off. Tomorrow there'll be something else. How are we getting ahead of the curve and providing a vision for what India could look like? How are we getting multiple thought leadership on this? The government has an outstanding opportunity to get private sector, to get not-for-profits and others to come back and say, let's put together a group of people who can actually lead us in thinking through how the education system can be changed to the requirements of the future, in a way that we are not doing today, and then be accountable to the public by the outcomes that come out of it. And multiple governments in India, not just the Modi government, but several others, have launched multiple schemes, but nobody has then said, okay, we launched this scheme, it only did this much, and that's not acceptable for the country, and so we need to change something, personnel, the design, etc.
So there have been schemes that have been proposed and tried out in the past, except you're saying that they haven't been evaluated for their impact afterwards?
That's correct. And I think India's history post-independence is littered with those. I think the expediency, and I don't understand politics that well, but the expediency of launching something, a clean India movement, or some movement, it's a good idea. It should be done, but where is the accountability? What are the numbers say? If cleanliness, for example, and I know this takes on the current government, but previous governments have all had similar sorts of challenges. If today the number is the index is at 100 out of a 0 to 100, it's a maximum unclean position. Then how is that number changing each year? And who is responsible for that? That kind of detailing, that kind of feedback to the country does not happen. It does not happen because the expectation that everybody in India will actually be able to access the similar sort of good infrastructure and cleanliness is simply not there. In fact, India, I had looked up some numbers. Let me take a quick look. Our human resource.
I was also wondering, is the government? I'm sure it must be attacking it from two sides. One is to improve the education system, and the other is to develop employment opportunities
Correct.
for the youth after they are educated and out the door. And I think that has probably caused a lot of these problems, or made these issues so explosive, is that you have all these youth who are unemployed. So there needs to be almost a match between the education and their employability.
Absolutely. So the education system needs to churn out people who have the confidence and the ability to take on problem solving and are familiar with the tools and the skills required in the world of today and in the world that is to come. That is on the one side, and there's massive challenges on that front, as we just discussed. On the jobs front, if you look at the set of problems there, as I had said earlier, youth unemployment 9.9% nationally, 13.6% urban youth unemployment, and 25% of 15 to 29-year-olds are not employed, education, or trained. Second, very interestingly, 87% of Indian employment is informal, as per the ILO. And this number is near the low-income country average, which is 89%, not India's lower middle class income tier, which is 83%. What I mean by that is that if the lower middle class income informal employment is 83%, then 17% is the formal employment.
And the informal, if you can just explain a little bit about the formal and informal.
So the formal education, formal employment is one where companies follow the rule on providing basic health care, unemployment insurance, the sort of leave, the personal time off, etc., kind of basic minimum rules of normal employment, which do not exploit workers. Whereas in the informal employment, it depends on the whims and fancies of whoever are the small employers of these people. And as we know, that varies all the way from practically slave labor all the way through to well-performing organizations.
So most of these students who are in CJP, they are striving to obtain formal employment.
Education. That is correct.
Right? Formal employment.
That is correct. And if you look at the major employer often of formal education, that typically goes to manufacturing. And in India, only 11.4% of the workforce is in the manufacturing area. And so the numbers on jobs are fairly poor. And a lot of the recent increases in education, in jobs, has been in the gig economy, where people are doing little things here and there. And particularly in the urban areas, There have been these delivery mechanisms through food distribution as well as groceries, which seem to have driven a large part of that. And the numbers there are pretty scary, because a lot of those kids who have been first failed by the education system and second do not have real jobs are getting compensations between 12,000 and 25,000 a month. And this is often below the effective minimum wage requirements. There are minimal protections for them if they get hurt, if they are, what is their insurance, etc. And there have been strikes and all sorts of things. But if the growth has come, a lot of the growth of jobs is coming from these types of things, then that's a problem. And this is not, again, one government or somebody's fault. This is how society in India today is. And I think the attention should move to how do we make, first of all, without fixing education, you cannot fix anything else. I mean, if people do not have the skill sets, which to me are primarily, they need to be confident of their ability to solve problems. That's a huge thing to be able to do. And secondly, they need to have the structures in their head about how to go about solving a problem. I personally don't care if they don't understand the nuances of physics or chemistry or math, so long as they can use AI or whatever else is there to be leaders and to be able to solve specific problems and get things done. India will have to figure out what are the tracks with pure science or pure subject expertise versus the utilization of skill sets for the future, which are AI driven, and say, how do we get people through? But it needs to be a thoughtful thing. It cannot be we provide the worst of education. We spend a huge amount on teachers and infrastructure. A lot of that money is just wasted because the outcomes are poor. So we need to be reporting on outcomes. We need to be holding ourselves accountable for it. And government alone cannot do it. This is our
that's
culture.
What I was going to say.
This
how about other stakeholders in the game?
Every Indian citizen and resident is a stakeholder. And in order to make this kind of thing actually work, a sort of coalition of partners have to come together and form working groups, maybe both at the central level as well as in actually individual pockets of where people live, to come up with ideas and solutions that are Indian. And some ideas will fail, some will not, but they excuse me, there needs to be leadership in a cross-functional sort of a manner. And that is what I think the solution set is. And I think the quicker we can move from the outlining of some of the relatively explosive challenges these students have had to what is the vision and the way forward to solve this. Because by stopping the leak of exam papers, we will not solve all of India's problems. That will be one of the things that absolutely has to happen. We have to have integrity in all our institutions and processes. But thinking a little deeper and actually acting on a more comprehensive set of reforms is the way forward. And the Cockroach Janta Party people and the students will of course welcome that. But their basic first demands will have to be met, I suspect, or negotiated, and then they need to move forward on a whole bunch of they and others will need to think through how to almost rebuild India's education system and rethink our approach to attracting investment, to doing work. Attracting investment for jobs in India has also traditionally been a real weak spot, because as I saw the numbers, for example,
I heard that foreign investment has
plummeted in the last little while.
I don't know the numbers on that.
Net FDI has been negative for 5 straight months into 2026. And from the numbers, it sounds like minus 1.3 billion happened in January 2026 alone. greenfield investment has fallen from 111 billion in 24 to 74 billion in 25. The 26 numbers are obviously not out. So, this is the result of people still struggling to both find the talent and sort of the legal infrastructure and so on to thrive in an Indian environment. You often hear stories of unrest, deep unrest in factories, especially in the north, and there are multiple challenges of getting permissions and licenses, even though there has been a lot more simplification done. And I think India really needs to sit down and look at its labor laws and say, if we have labor laws, how can we make sure we actually implement them? Because my understanding is that the actual implementation of some of these laws are poor. And India is, again, rule of law, for example. I think our ranking has now fallen to a point which is so ridiculous. 86th out of 143 countries, as per some of the major trackers of this in 2025.
So I guess this also speaks to the
Down
exam
6 places.
leaks,
All kinds of
and
things. Rule of law,
lack of accountability.
Rule of law
many of
means
these
that
politicians.
if there is somebody from the poorest part of India, lowest caste, if he or she has
a complaint,
friction
an issue
with law, they get treated as anybody in the higher classes would be, and there is no chance right now. That is not the environment there. So I think some of these things with a reimagined vision of India, first of all, should be looked at.
So, I mean, from this has been excellent. You've offered us a lot of information and perspective on this issue. I just to sort of end on a positive note, this whole uprising of the Cockroach Party and these students, essentially, it can also be seen as an opportunity or as a spark for the whole country, the government and other stakeholders, to make some really massive positive changes for the society at large.
I completely agree. I think this is a seminal point. It could be a seminal point for India to really reimagine what it can be and to take really practical, accountable, outcomes-based steps to fix the problem. It's not going to go away in a day or two. It's not going to go away quickly. But for example, the government could easily continue down the path. I believe now it's beginning to actually embrace with the CJP to try and meet it and to try and figure out something that helps settle the current legitimate set of challenges. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just an important but tiny first step there. But the government can and should, if it wants, say that, look, this problem reflects some of what we were discussing earlier, which needs to be solved, and they can then open things up a little more to say, let's get the best minds that are Indian or even foreign for that matter to come and help us work through how do we change a system which has a poor education system into a more functioning education system that prepares students with skills for the future, which can be done in India and not dependent on foreign countries, as we've now seen. For India to become strong, which is the most important thing, nothing else works. And whatever your alliances with various countries, get strong first, have the skill sets. And then how do we set up our internal job creation and manufacturing system in a way that labor laws are followed and that things get simplified, which need to be simplified, which the government has been trying to do, but I'm not sure that it has gone all the way through. So this will require massive change. It will not be ideology based. It will be people based. It'll be how do we actually help the people of India.
And
it'll
also practical outcomes.
absolutely practical.
Not only talk.
Yeah, not only talk. Accountability based, results oriented kinds of changes. It's a big set of things, but it's an opportunity, and an opportunity where I think India has plenty of talent who can lead us through that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.